Yeah, I was just thinking that illustration, just way my mind worked, talking about the pre-package. I was just thinking an illustration of food that you buy, and if you buy your pre-packed food, ready-made meal, which you just stick in the microphone, even in the microwave, which I normally do when my wife's away. That's you're not going to find it. All you want to know is how long do I cook it for, which is very different if you get all the ingredients from scratch and say, how do I put this together? How do I make it tasty? I guess there's really something in that, JT, isn't there?
Yeah, although something quite unusual came to my mind when James was speaking, that for many of the young people we work with, rebellion is not getting drunk.
Right.
Quite a number of them come from unchurched families, and their natural experience of an evening on the weekend is either to go and get themselves totally done in, or just to watch their dad come in totally drunk, or their parents off on weed, or whatever else, because it happens. Hey, we're third generation druggies now.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that when the youngsters themselves decide that, okay, we're going to give up smoking, or I'm not going to get drunk again, or I'm not going to sleep around, apart from the latter one, we experience a lot of parental pressure and opposition, partly because perhaps they may feel guilty at the example being set by their children, but also they can't cope with the fact that their children are different to them and are rebelling, which is fantastic, of course. But we get the other side of the coin as well.
Yes.
And I wouldn't... I understand where James is coming from, and I agree with most of what he says, in the sense that the young people's faith needs to be their own, to be their own. It cannot be their parents'. But we will fight like mad, and we don't always succeed, particularly for Christian kids, to stop them going into this self-destructive mode for a year or two.
Yes.
We had one lad who came to us. He got baptised early. We didn't want him to get baptised, but he did. Christian family. He went off into the occult, rebelled, rejected the faith and everything. He's come back now. But wouldn't it be great if we were able to have stopped him doing this nonsense?
Yes.
Thankfully, there's not been any long-term damage, apart from one aspect of his life. But we would fight to try and prevent the rebellion.
Yeah, it's rebellion, isn't it? But I suppose it's also could be summed up as investigation.
Yeah.
In other words, you've got this pre-packed. This is the way you do. You go to church, 10:30 and 6, or 11 and 6:30, or whatever, and maybe when you're feeling really good, you go to the midweek Bible study, and that's it. And it's investigating. Okay, well, how do I live my life? What's behind that life? And so it is unpacking that pre-package. And whether that needs rebellion in the full sense, of which I would agree with you, JT, if we could stop kids going right down that road for their own good, but they certainly need to take a stand against the package that's been presented to them, don't they, James? Yeah.
I hate to quote Socrates because it makes me sound aloof.
Put a Socrates in it, come on.
But Socrates did say that the unquestioned life is not worth living, right? But also the uncontrolled life, I would believe, is not worth living either. And I think one of the main challenges for us as Christians and as church leaders is to guide young people through this stage where they do have to reject what they've been given in order to take it back up, in order to question it. We need to guide them safely through that, and that's got to be one of our main parts of the job description, really. We've got to be able to bring them through that without just them hitting the self-destruct button and plummeting. We need to be able to keep enough of a grasp on them to look after them, but not tight enough so that we strangle them.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a very important balance to make.
Yes.
And can I just say this as well, that in some ways, tribe will assist the rebellion, particularly for Christian young people from Christian backgrounds, because many of the forms of worship that we use, like some viewers may be familiar with our eternity nights where we use dance music, etc. Some of the ways in which we express our faith are non-religious, most certainly, and on an initial view, look worldly. Like when we were on the program a while ago, we played a snippet, and the negative reaction from viewers
that's right.
was based purely on the style of music and what it looked like. It looked like people in a disco having a nightclub. But what they so in one sense, for the young people, that's their rebellion. They're expressing, they're having experience of God and Christian fellowship and worship, and are expressing it in a completely different way to the way their parents would. Well, don't knock it. It's good rebellion.
Something else you said, James, which I was interested in, because again, I think it comes down not just to youth workers, but anybody that is involved in the church that is going to communicate with youth. When you've been saved 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, whatever it is, you have a certain standard. God has led you in a certain way, and as it were, you are to live up to that standard by which God has given you. When you're talking to somebody that's 6 months, a year old in the Lord, that's not the standard. And it's so easy, isn't it, just to take where I am, what I know of God, and just put it and say, you've got to live like this. I wasn't living like that when I was a year old in the Lord. And I think we almost need lessons in how to do and what not to do in communicating with people like that.
Absolutely. I mean, this is very apt for me. I was doing my dissertation. Well, actually, I was doing my dissertation on Bob Dylan, but that's another question for another time. But part of it was looking at the way people develop spiritually.
Yes.
And I think this is something that is just unheard of in church circles. People develop spiritually, and it's the same way they develop mentally, the same way they develop physically. They develop spiritually, and they're at different stages depending on how far along that journey they are. And yes, some people, meteoric, and some people are a lot slower. And I think we do need to know, we have to have a better awareness in churches, really, of what this spiritual development is like and what it means for the way we talk to people, the way we act towards people, and what we expect from people. I think much of the difficulties that we can have with people walking away from the church, walking away from the faith, is because perhaps we haven't understood where they are properly, and perhaps we haven't responded to that very, very well. Perhaps this is something that we need to rethink in our churches and get a better awareness of.
Do you have, I mean, obviously in your grouping, and I'll ask you the same thing in a moment, do you have training for leadership? Or are you just looking for that leadership to come through and you see where people are and that's it? How does that work out?
Well, it's interesting you say that. I'm on the threshold of I'm just about to start work in a church in a youth work capacity. So I'm kind of at the beginning of that journey, that JT has been on for so many years. And I'm working with a couple who I've become good friends with, and they are absolutely sold up, paid up. They believe in young people being trained for leadership early on, because one of the things we really do badly is we let youth get to 18 years old when they leave and they have done nothing and never been given any responsibility. They've never been shown that they have something to offer. They've never been encouraged to do anything other than sit and receive and receive and receive. And actually, many of those young people will then walk away. They'll go to university, or they'll walk away from a church. They won't find a place where they can call home, because they won't find something within themselves. They won't have been encouraged to find something within themselves that they can use in any church situation, that they can offer to other people. And perhaps leadership is one of those things that we don't invest in it very well in adults, let alone in young people.
Yes.
And perhaps we need to offer more leadership and get them to take ownership and take responsibility for things early on. And that's where you'll get them realizing that the faith is not something that is a contract that they sign, but something that guides them and that energizes them through everything that they're doing.
Yes.